you've not yet seen the review on the Action 3, I've done a few videos because I had the focusing issue, which I won't go into detail about in this video, because this video is all about shooting with a gimbal, ND filters, and shooting in manual settings, and why you might want to do that with the Action 3. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about D-Cinelike, which I've now switched over to. This is great if you want to have more flexibility over colour correcting and colour grading your footage. Shooting in normal is fine, the footage actually looks really good in certain scenarios, most scenarios, but if you definitely want more flexibility and control, then D-Cinelike is the best way. Normally what I would say is with D-Cinelike footage to shoot at +1 EV, or as close to 0 as possible, but with the Pocket 2 I used to say shoot in +1 EV. With the Action 3 I would just say shoot at 0 EV, make sure that your EV meter is reading at 0, because the footage would be too blown out if you shoot anywhere past that. I think you can go to like 0.5 plus 0.5 EV, but just keep it as close to 0 as you possibly can. And so when it comes to actually colour correcting and colour grading the D-Cinelike footage, I created LUTs for the Pocket 2 which do work with the Action 3 as well, so that's just going to make it a lot quicker for you to just colour correct the footage. This doesn't grade the footage giving you a specific look. You could get other LUTs for that, or you can just work on it yourself, but in terms of colour correcting the footage and just bringing it back up to a normal look, then the LUTs that I created work with the Action 3 as well. When I just did that last bit, you might have seen that the colours were kind of changing, so it was looking a bit warm and then looking a bit cooler. So the next setting is your white balance, and this is something that you want to set manually so that you don't have that fluctuation in the colour temperature. So the easiest thing to do with the Action 3 is actually point the camera to whichever way you're going to be walking, whichever way you're going to be facing, set it to auto, and then quickly flip it into manual if you don't really know what temperature, which white balance setting you need to use. What I would say is that if you're shooting in daylight, then most of the time 5500 Kelvin is going to be the best setting. But if not, then just do that little trick of setting it to auto and then setting it to manual straight away. Before I switch over the exposure settings from auto to manual, I just want to give you a few reasons why you might actually want to do this. The first thing is when you shoot in auto exposure, your motion blur is very unnatural. So I'm waving my hand around at the moment, it looks kind of, there's no real motion blur in it, it's just kind of, yeah, I don't know how to explain it other than just showing you what I mean. However, when you switch over to manual exposure and you set your shutter speed to be double your frame rate, you start to get natural motion blur, and that's called the 180-degree shutter rule. So I'm going to switch over to manual and give you an idea of what that actually looks like. So just remember how my hand looks in this clip, and when I switch over to manual, then you'll see the difference. Okay, so I've now switched over to manual exposure. Have a look at my hands. The motion blur is a lot more natural. It's not so jerky and it's more smooth, and that's essentially why you want to switch over to manual. However, you may have noticed that my footage is very much overexposed. So this is where ND filters come in. They cut out a lot of light that's going into your sensor, and so you have different strengths. So now I've got my ND filter on. The footage isn't completely blown out anymore, and this is why you need an ND filter when shooting in manual exposure. And also, again, look at the motion blur in my hand in comparison to what it looked like before when I was shooting in auto exposure. ND filters come in various different strengths, and the ones that I tend to use, and I use these for all my cameras, are freewell filters because the quality is exceptional. It doesn't add any weird colour casts to your footage, and it doesn't degrade the quality of the footage at all. So if you are looking for ND filters, then check out freewell filters because they're great and I can really highly recommend them. So the filter that I just put on is actually a circular polarizer filter as well as an ND filter. And the reason why you would want to use a circular polarizer is if you're filming where you're going to have reflections, so things like bodies of water, glass, that kind of thing. And when you turn a polarizer, it will reduce that glare and give you a much cleaner image. But then you can also get filters which just ND filters, and they're either individual ND filters or variable ND filters. With the Action 3, I've got individual ND filters as well as the ND filters with the polarizers on. So when I'm not filming bodies of water or in urban environments where there's loads of glass, then I will just use the individual ND filters. But it is useful to have both. So you can still use the polarizer even if you're not going to be around bodies of water or anything with reflections. It's just that it works a lot better in those scenarios. The one thing that I will say is with ISO, I tend to set that as low as possible, so 100. However, on a day like this where the sun's going in and out of the clouds, or I'm walking in front of trees and the sun's going in and out of the trees, I will tend to set my ISO so it's a variable ISO. So I have it between 100 to 400. So if I'm going into a bit of a shady patch here, it's not going to be completely dark. It'll just bring up the exposure a little bit with the ISO. But I don't want to go too far past 400 because then the footage will just end up looking grainy. So if you're on a day where it's completely overcast and you know that the footage, the exposure isn't going to change, then just set your ISO to 100. But otherwise, if you're going to be having variable lighting conditions, then yeah, anything between 100 and 400 should do it. All settings are now manual. However, because the shutter speed has been dropped down so low, image stabilization isn't going to work very well. So you might be able to see in the background, as I'm walking, there is a lot of jitter and some artifacts, and it just doesn't look very good. And this would also happen in low light because the shutter speed would be a lot lower in low light to try and compensate for the low light. So this is where a gimbal comes in. The other great thing about using a gimbal is the fact that you can get some jib-like shots. So if you put it on an extended selfie stick or an extension pole, you can get these kind of shots. When it comes to gimbals, any small gimbal's really going to do. I use the Hohem iSteady Pro 4 because it's splash proof and it just works really easily to just put the camera on without having to unscrew anything. You just literally unhook it, put the camera on and then hook it back again, and it's really quick. So that is my gimbal of choice, but honestly any small gimbal is going to be fine. What I will say is though that you will want to keep image stabilization on when you use the gimbal, because otherwise you're going to get micro jitters in the footage, and having rock steady on is gonna just get rid of those micro jitters and give you the smoothest footage possible with the gimbal. So hopefully that gives you some insight into how I'd go about vlogging with the Action 3. I will share a video about colour correcting and colour grading D-Cinelike footage next, so if you haven't subscribed, do subscribe so that you don't miss that video. But if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'll put links in the description to everything that I used in this video so that you can check it out. But yeah, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.